So rational numbers and irrational numbers are different. They are separate groups of numbers. And they have nothing in common. And I'm going to go through a chart when I'm looking at that number 3 that kind of shows how they relate. So number 2, I'm going to have you just go ahead and work on that. That's just like we were looking at last time with approximating square roots. If you didn't have a calculator, you could have an idea of where that number fits, can visually think about where that goes on a number line. Okay, so real numbers have 2 groups of numbers. We have rational numbers and irrational. Irrational numbers is decimals that do not end or repeat. And so a lot of times we'll think about like square root of 10, because if I type that in, the decimal that I get is going to keep going forever. It's not going to repeat. The one you're probably most familiar with is pi, because that we know that doesn't repeat and it keeps going forever. So irrational numbers are their own group. Everything else is in the rational numbers, but all of this is under the umbrella of a real number. When you get to algebra 2, you get to talk about imaginary numbers. And yes, they are real. It's more to do with electrical current, so it's not quite as exciting as just completely all on its own. Rational numbers have a group of counting numbers. And that's like the first thing you learn. 1, 2, 3, those are all considered counting numbers. Counting numbers are a part of a bigger group of whole numbers. Whole numbers just adds in a 0. So the difference between counting numbers and whole numbers is 0. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3. So it's like all of these circles are concentric because they are all within each other. And then we go on to our next group, which is integers. So integers would be the counting numbers. It's going to be the whole numbers. And then we're going to add on to this. So it's whole numbers and their opposites. So we're adding in like -3, -5. All those negative numbers are now in integers. We also have a couple other groups of numbers. Those all go together really nicely. We also have a group of fractions. And when we talk about fractions, we're talking about an integer divided by an integer. It's like 1/3, 11/9. All those things would be considered the fractions that we can have in there. And we have one more group in our rational numbers, and that's going to be decimals that terminate. And yes, these are kind of related to the fractions, because if you can write, for example, 1/5, it's going to be 0.2 as a decimal, but sometimes people think of them differently. Decimals that repeat, such as 0.3 repeating. And all of this is a part of those rational numbers. So rational numbers are one group, irrational are another, but they are all a part of a real number. And so we're going to be kind of looking at how can I identify rational and irrational numbers. We've been doing that throughout. It's just more kind of being able to see the bigger picture right now.